lo and behold, if you give money away to people without them actually working to produce anything, you've created a demand without any productivity to create supply. And then you have this giant inflationary problem that was so painful because it not only ran up the debt, but it created inflation at the same time. So those policies don't work. You gotta have growth. Growth comes from productivity. You have to have people working, earning, producing things, growing the economy. That's another aspect of how we get out of this. We have to grow. So we know that socialism doesn't create growth. It just spreads the misery more thinly. These strategies don't work, and we're going to have to we got a lot of work to do on this front.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. When family budgets get tighter and money doesn't seem to stretch as far, cuts are made because overspending isn't an option. Maybe it's skipping that drive-through meal, delaying a purchase, or juggling bills to make it all work. Families make those tough decisions every day because they have to. But the federal government, it doesn't live by the same rules. While nearly every state in the country has some sort of balanced budget requirement, Washington doesn't. But that could all change with a new amendment that has been introduced. This constitutional amendment would finally force the federal government to live within its means. Today's guest has spent much of his career pushing for that kind of discipline. He served in the Ohio state legislature, led major statewide initiatives, and held some of the highest-ranking positions in Ohio government, and now serves in the U.S. Senate. He's always trying to bring a little more common sense and accountability into the government. I want to welcome to the podcast Ohio Senator Jon Husted. Well, Senator, thanks so much for joining us. You became a senator in January after serving in the Ohio legislature as lieutenant governor. Coming from a state that requires a balanced budget, what have been some of your frustrations with the federal budget process?
Well, look, you come here as an outsider. I have public service experience, but it's been at the state level. And over that time, whether in the legislature or as lieutenant governor, we balanced every budget. Why did we balance every budget? Because the Constitution of states requires it. And so states make tough decisions. We decide, hey, if we're going to do tax cuts, then we have to do spending restraint. If we're going to do more spending, then we're going to have to make sure that we can afford to do it, that the budget is balanced. That's what states and local governments and families do every day, but not at the federal level. At the federal level, we've run up a $38 trillion national debt. That's unsustainable. We spend $1 trillion a year just on financing the debt. And that's got to stop. And so what I've witnessed here in my 10 months in office in DC is that unless we force the Congress and the administrations to balance the budget, they won't do it. And so that's why I'm turning to a constitutional amendment to try to get it done.
Well, it seems like, some good common sense coming from the heartland that you're bringing to DC to try to install something that seems so commonsensical to people that we should have to balance our budget, and yet we're so far from it. So there's been past efforts to pass balanced budget amendments, but why do you think they've fallen short of the 2/3 necessary in both chambers of Congress? Sorry.
Well, it's a great question. I wasn't here for any of that, so I guess as a new guy, I can just have naive hope that we can get it done, right? But I'm teaming up with the others, including Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming. But I'll say this: I think maybe the time is different now because we're running out of options. Yeah. At $38 trillion in national debt, we spend $1 trillion a year in debt payments. Once you put that in context. I believe the only other nation that even has a budget that spends more than $1 trillion a year is China. And so think about that. the interest on our debt is bigger than the budget, the actual budget of any other nation other than China. So that's context. It is not sustainable. And so I hope that people are going to begin to realize that we're going to need a mechanism to save us from ourselves, that we're going to need a constitutional amendment that demands it. Now, why I think this one is the most practical of all of those floating around out there is that it gives us 10 years to do it. So I think other amendments fail. They say, well, we'll pass a constitutional amendment and then we're going to balance the budget. Well, it's hard to bring it into balance in 1 year. And so this would give a ramp down period that would allow us to get the budget under control and then balance it within that time period. So I hope that it will bring on other people that say, hey, I know it needs to happen. This will give us a runway to be able to accomplish that. So maybe we can get the support to get it passed.
So your amendment is called the Principle-Based Balanced Budget Amendment. And if I understand it right, the two main elements are that it allows for 10 years for the budget to be balanced, which I think you just talked about makes a lot of sense. It's just kind of acknowledging the realities of balancing the budget. And then if there's any emergency spending, it would be emergency deficit spending will require 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, you got it. You got the most important principle. It's got to be balanced, but give people 10 years to do it, to get there. And then if there is an emergency, a true emergency, then you'd have to have a vote of 2/3 of the 66 senators and 2/3 of the Congress to be able to override it. So that's to me seems to be the most practical way to get this accomplished. But it is, look, eventually deficit spending is going to erode the quality of our life. I think it already has. Yeah. I think it's also it's just wrong to steal from future generations by spending beyond our means. And I have a I think we're headed towards America's 250th anniversary, right?
Yeah.
The founding of the greatest nation. And for most of that 250 years, it's been every generation sacrificing for the future, right? We do tough things to build a nation based on freedom and virtue so that we can pass it along to future, an inheritance, so to speak, to future generations. And that's been from the Revolutionary War, Civil War, all the wars that we fought, civil rights, all of those things. Struggle now to give something better to our children. But since the 1960s, I would argue that America has been stealing from future generations. Rather than sacrificing and giving them an inheritance, it's giving them an IOU, a bill for the excesses that we have voted for ourselves as a nation. And it's time for it to come to an end. And with this balanced budget amendment, I'm hoping to bring some people to our cause.
Yeah, well, I know Americans for Prosperity are big fans of this, and we really think it's a really necessary reform. I'm really fascinated. I had never heard the statistic that you brought forward there, that the $1 trillion that we spend in interest on the debt is bigger than everybody else's actual budget other than China. That's horrifying. I think one of the challenges has always been, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, that I don't think Americans really have always gotten interested in the debt because they don't know how it really affects them. But it really does, because it drives up the price of everything and drives inflation, and it obviously takes $1 million.
Interest rates.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you connect people to the consequence for it? Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry, David.
No, I'm sorry. How do you connect people like your constituents to the real impact that wasteful spending has?
Well, look, different things appeal to different people. I try to appeal, both on the moral sense of, hey, it's just wrong to do to your children and grandchildren. I appeal through on a practical sense that if, think about this, what we've done, $1 trillion in interest payments. What could we have done with $1 trillion? If we had just been smart 20 years ago and said, no, we're not going to deficit spend? How much better off would we be today? Could we use that money for other things? There's the practical aspect of that. But, it is hard. It is hard to explain to people that your actions today that seem convenient are going to be more painful for you in the long run. I do think it's very hard to make this feel real to people because it's like a deferred pain versus immediate. But it is manifesting in higher prices, higher interest rates, making the dollar weaker.
Yeah.
All of those things that erode people's buying power. Their ability to afford things. We were in this affordability issue, affordability crisis right now that people want to talk about. The deficit and debt contribute to that with a weaker dollar and higher interest rates. And I would also say it's $1 trillion out the door every day for interest payments that you don't get the benefit from, and it's only going to grow worse. But you're right; it's a difficult thing to make real to people in their everyday lives.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that the mood in Congress has been shifting. We saw DOGE earlier in this year, and we saw other efforts, to really get arms around runaway spending. It's just so hard. I mean, nobody likes to cut spending, really. But when you're elected to office, it's much easier to spend. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you think your colleagues kind of have the backbone and the incentive to try to move ahead with this?
I think some do, but you need a majority. You need a bipartisan majority to be able to get it accomplished. This is not something that you're going to be able to accomplish on a partisan basis. You're going to have Democrats and Republicans lean in on a compromise. But there are going to be real consequences. It's going to eventually affect Social Security. It's eventually going to affect Medicare, Medicaid, things that are popular for people. If we don't preserve them, if we don't take the steps to preserve the things, this safety net that people have come to rely on, and those are going to be real. I heard Charlie Munger, the late Charlie Munger, once talk about the debt and deficit, and he said it's like jumping out of a 9-story building. It's not a problem until it is.
Yeah,
and I fear that it's going to take something like that, just an abrupt consequence of this, before we're going to get people to really make a change. But by then the changes get painful. Like when I don't want the changes to have to be painful. I hope they can be gradual and something that we can absorb by slowly moving our nation to have the revenue and spending discipline that we need to get this accomplished. But that's why the constitutional amendment approach, I think, is a better way to do it. But eventually people won't buy our debt, or the price of financing our debt will become unaffordable.
Yeah.
And that will be the crisis. And when you hit a crisis, it's painful to solve.
So you mentioned this is a constitutional amendment, so it's a little bit of a different process than just the regular bill process. Can you tend to take us through, like, what are the necessary steps to get this enacted?
You got to get 66 votes you got to get a 2/3 majority to get it out of the Congress. And then you got to have 38 states ratify it and all that comes with that. So it's a long process. States have 7 years, by the way, to get this ratified once it would be passed. So I'm just hopeful that we can get that done and advance it. I want to put this. You talked about statistics. I did this the other day. So you hear about people saying, well, we're going to solve our problems. You hear Mondami, right, in New York, saying we're going to tax the wealthy and provide free, government run grocery stores and free daycare and all that kind of stuff. Do you realize that if you confiscated every penny of every American billionaire, all right, it would add up to around $7.5 trillion. So you could only pay off, $7.5 trillion of the national debt. We'd still have over $30 trillion in national debt.
Wow.
And no billionaires left to tax.
Wow.
So I'm just putting that in context of just how enormous this problem is and how difficult and how much mutual, bipartisan collaboration it'll take to get it done, because you can't just tax your way out of it. You can't just cut spending to get out of it. It's going to have to be a combination of both.
It's crazy about socialists like Mondami and folks who espouse those ideas. One of the main reasons we have that their popularity in some cases, and I think that he was elected, is that affordability has become such a problem. In a place like New York, it's really acute. And one of the main things that's driving a crisis in affordability is wasteful spending that's driving up rates, that's driving up prices, has contributed mightily to inflation. And so it's like, we're just going to keep engaging the same behavior, runaway government spending.
Yeah.
That's going to keep driving up prices and make everything unaffordable. And it's just craziness.
Yeah. Well, if you notice where the affordability crisis hits the hardest, it's in blue states and blue cities, right? Those are the places that the affordability crisis is hitting the hardest. But let's look back at the pandemic. We spent trillions of dollars giving things away. And that created inflation, because lo and behold, if you give money away to people without them actually working to produce anything, you've created a demand without any productivity to create supply. And then you have this giant inflationary problem that was so painful because it not only ran up the debt, but it created inflation at the same time. So those policies don't work. You got to have growth. Growth comes from productivity. You have to have people working, earning, producing things, growing the economy. That's another aspect of how we get out of this. We have to grow. So we know that socialism doesn't create growth. It just spreads the misery more thinly. It is, these strategies don't work, and we're going to have to we got a lot of work to do on this front. But growth is part of that. Innovation, growth, all of those kinds of things are also part of the solution.
Well, so what do you see as the future with the principle-based budget, Balanced Budget Act? What are the next steps for you?
I'm hopeful that we'll get a vote on it. One of the things I've asked for is just, let's get a vote. Let's see where everybody stands, right? Let's see where the Democrats are. Let's see where the Republicans are on this. Let's see who really is serious about doing this. And I hope that we get a vote on it in the coming year, because this is going to come to a head. It's whether we do it the easy way or the hard way. And I just think that the constitutional amendment is an easier way, because it forces us to get there over time, rather than to have it fall off the cliff, literally, which is what's going to happen if we don't get the spending under control.
Yeah. So if this were enacted and it passes all the hoops that it's got to go through, how do you, just to put a kind of a point on it, how do you think this will really benefit future generations of Americans?
It'll save our country. There's the financial future. The future of our country is going to be contingent upon us being able to get our spending and our budget deficits under control. And our children and grandchildren will not have an America to live in like the one that we've enjoyed if we don't get our fiscal house in order. You just can't keep borrowing. And you know what happens at the end of that. Once you can no longer borrow, once the interest rates for borrowing become, or the interest rates for borrowing become very, very expensive for the country, you eventually bankrupt. You default, and the only way to get out of default is to dramatically increase taxes and dramatically cut spending to fix the problem. And that's what we don't want to have to do. We want to be able to gradually solve this problem, not just overnight have to meet a catastrophe head on. And if we don't, it's really a choice. This is going to come to a head. It's just a matter of whether we do it in the easier way or the harder way.
I like to say, taking a common sense Midwestern approach to addressing one of the biggest issues facing us. It's truly a national security issue. And the idea that there's a phase, that there's a 10-year ramp here makes a ton of sense. And it shows that you actually want something that's workable. It's not just a talking point. It's like, hey, no, we really do need to address this crisis. And I applaud you and your colleagues who have been working on this and put it forward.
I will tell you this. I ask people about this, and everybody says in theory they want a balanced budget, but I've talked to so many people that have said, yeah, I would take a little bit less if I knew it was going to contribute to buying down the debt. I've talked to many people. If people talk about rich people being selfish, no, I've not talked to any person that's of means who said that they wouldn't be willing to pay higher taxes if they knew it would be to balance the budget and eliminate the debt or buy down the debt.
Yep.
But what they don't trust is that you're going to get taxed more, and then it's just going to be used to spend more, and it's not going to solve the problem. That's what a constitutional amendment would do. It would give people the confidence that the sacrifices they're making, either in taking less or contributing more, would actually go for solving the problem. But right now, they don't trust the current system we have. And so until we have those guardrails in place, I think that it's going to be hard to persuade people to make those kind of changes.
Agreed. Well, Senator, thank you for your courage standing up on this important issue and showing this real leadership. I wish you the best of luck.
Great. Thank you.
Folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.